Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Joss Colchester. I'm with the Systems Innovation Hub here in London, and today I'm going to be facilitating this session where we're talking about organizational structure and decentralized organizations in particular. It's part of our theme around what systems thinking and systems innovation means in the context of organizations. So this is about the third or the fourth session in this series. In the past, we were talking more about leadership, actually, and different aspects to that: emergence, integration, transitions, holistic approach, so on and so forth. That's what we covered there. Some of you would have been there for that. Today, we're moving on. We're talking about, as I said, organizational structure. And we're going to have an interactive discussion around that in case you're new to this. We're going to explore this topic along 4 different dimensions here. And let me give a little bit of context before we get started. What do we mean by decentralized organizations? This is taken from our guide on our website around networked organizations. You can find it if you look on the website and look through the guides through networked organizations, you'll find it there, and that's where this is taken from. Today's event is being streamed and recorded. I'll just make a note of that. So here we are. What is a networked organization or a decentralized organization? Lots of different ways of thinking about this and talking about this. Networked organizations are organizations that aggregate and coordinate members through peer-to-peer networked platforms or peer-to-peer networks. They're typically open organizations, enabling them to harness the mass of people's productive capacity through on-demand networks. This results in a very dynamic organization that can expand to meet capacity as members fluidly join or leave the organization. A reduction in transaction costs. So a lot of this, as we know, is kind of a response to what's going on out there in the world. We've got big changes happening in our organizations, and that's kind of a response to the changes in the context, the environment they operate in, particularly around how dynamic and volatile and uncertain it's become, but also around information technology and how interconnected we've become is also driving big changes here. So a reduction in transaction costs due to information technology makes it possible to create new forms of organization that can harness the efforts of the many within informal networks, instead of always depending upon a few within formal kind of centralized organizations. It now becomes viable to create open organizations where anyone that can contribute anything is of value, and by getting enough people can join, and by getting enough people contributing only a small amount, a network can compete with traditional organizations. So this is kind of what we're talking about, trying to move a shift away from these more formal kind of bureaucratic mode of organization that really came to dominate in the modern era. The bureaucratic system of organization was a great kind of innovation about 100, 200 years ago, enabled us to do a lot of amazing things, manage nation states and healthcare systems and build national railway systems and so forth. But today, well, over the past 50 years, we've really started to bump up against the limitations of that. And we know it's kind of a closed system, it's centralized, it's based on kind of a chain of command and authoritative kind of linkages, it's vertical, it's static, and so forth. And we're thinking more about this kind of open ecosystem, network, platform. I'm kind of using those words interchangeably. Decentralized, it's more about the value exchange between the members. It's horizontal and it's kind of dynamic. That's what we're doing today, organizing in new ways. But the challenge, of course, is to design networks that bring people and organizations together in new ways that our collective and individual choices and actions actually build to a shared intent, shared intelligence, collective capacity, and keep everyone aligned within feedback loops that create resilience. This is part of the challenge. How do we actually develop organizations like that? In the past, achieving such an organization has remained largely elusive. However, new possibilities are now emerging as information networks become strengthened and matured. So this is what we're talking about, these kind of decentralized organizations. I'm going to share the link with you again in the chat. If you could please join me here on the mirror board. I'll get you to post up some of your ideas here in a minute. That should take you to this board here, where I have 4 different sections, and we're going to kind of look at 4 different dimensions to this networked organization. The first one here is around, let me knock that down, open in relation to closed organizations, right? There's one aspect. We'll talk about that now in a minute. Over here, centralized versus decentralized. Down here, this kind of peer-to-peer feedback dynamic that's a key part of decentralized organizations as opposed to the more kind of fixed structure. And over here, this kind of dynamic swarm agile organization, which is a characteristic relative to the kind of fixed, stable model of the bureaucratic system. So that's what we're talking about. Hope you'll join me up here. I've got a couple of questions. I'll just, again, say a few words here. This move from something that's closed, a centralized organization concentrates inwards and creates boundaries around them that define the limits of control and structure. The organization is defined by its boundary, thus creating many similar organizations within the overall system. You know, this idea of silos that we end up, this reductionist approach to organization ends up in a lot of kind of silos and recreation of the wheel and so forth, because we create these kind of closed organizations. Here we're thinking about these open ones. Distributed organizations are open networks. Anyone can join or leave, forming an ecosystem in which participants with different capabilities and needs connect and exchange resources in a much more kind of fluid and dynamic way. So that's one of the key aspects. Example of this is Wikipedia, right? This is Britannica here. You and me, we can't contribute anything to that encyclopedia. Would have to be a professional, would have to be part of that organization. Here, any of us can go and post on Wikipedia or list a room on Airbnb, so on and so forth. So it's kind of, it taps into the long tail, right? There's mass of people along here who aren't as productive as the professionals, right? The centralized organization is really just focusing on these very productive people, the experts, whereas the decentralized organization can actually harness the capacities of many. Like Amazon allowed many books to be published instead of just the really elite ones that are going to sell a lot. Many people can now publish them. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. I have a couple of questions here. Let's take a look at those. What are the benefits of open organization? So we're going to have a little discussion for about the next 10 minutes. You're going to post some stuff up, and then we're going to have to talk about that. I want you to kind of think about these considerations, at the same time look at the image here and maybe playing off the image. The questions here, what are the benefits of open organizations? Or can you think of other examples of open organizations? Or in contrast, what are the benefits of closed organizations, right? We don't want to say that open is always better than closed, but what are actually the benefits and drawbacks of two? I think it's good to make a kind of balanced assessment of them. So if you're new to this, grab a sticky over here and plonk it down just around the image. Have a think about the image and what we've been talking about there, closed versus relative to open. Of course, it's always a spectrum, right? Not trying to create too kind of black and white an image here, but what do you think are kind of the benefits and disadvantages of each? Grab a sticky and put it down there. Let's take a couple of minutes to have a think about that and post our ideas up. If you have any questions, you can post them in the chat or you can shout them out. Okay, I'm going to jump in and we'll take a look at some of these. See what you posted up here. So you can stay posting if you have ideas. Leadership capabilities are enhanced. Someone want to talk on this? Leadership capabilities, do you mean in centralized or decentralized organizations?
Hi, Joss. That was me. Yeah, let me shoot. Yeah, I'm probably more in decentralized, in decentralized organizations. It actually links to another sticky note that I put up. But by definition, because you're having, I guess, if you will, people joining or trying to spearhead activities based on their own volition and their own desires, we actually have a greater pool of leadership capabilities that are being developed versus centralized boss, if you will, no? So less people taking orders from a central figure, and frankly speaking, groups of people, yeah, kind of with amongst themselves conceptualizing, driving, and trying to advance actions and so forth. Hope that's clear. Thanks so much. Over.
Yeah. So you're getting more kind of distributed. It's a different kind of leadership, isn't it? It's not the expert leader, the person who has a formal role as a leadership. It's like everybody's getting a chance to be a leader, is kind of what you're saying.
Precisely, precisely.
And developing their capacities, their individual capacities. And you can get more when everybody gets the opportunity to do that. Okay, great. So manage complexity in a better way. What are we talking about here? Is this the kind of open, decentralized organization? It's able to manage complexity in a better way? Anybody want to talk on this? It's a good question. Anybody, which of these kinds of organizations do you think is going to deal with complexity better? This centralized one, it's able to, well, we could talk about it, but we know that kind of power and decision making are centralized, which makes it easier to kind of make decisions and execute and so forth. Maybe that's better in a kind of volatile, dynamic, uncertain world, or is it better this kind of decentralized approach? And why? Does anybody want to talk on that?
Happy to jump in on that one. It wasn't my sticky note, but it was related to mine, which was enables more kind of an emergent strategy. So in the sense, I guess complexity often, is about dealing with context a lot of the time and learning. And also enabling people to do that across an organization. And I guess a lot of that is down to be able to react quickly and with kind of speed as well, and kind of big centralized organizations where you've got a lot of deliberate planning are suited to kind of well, not only do those things take a long time, but they also tend to be, develop appropriate strategies for things that have come in the past and things that we know how to deal with, as opposed to unexpected, contextually dependent problems, which might not kind of fit planned norms about how things work. So that's what I would, hopefully that wasn't too rambling.
No, it's very good. And I mean, we say, Beth, there's different dimensions to this, isn't there? Like they're going to be strong at some things, kind of weak at others, and there's many dimensions to the organization. You're touching upon an important one there about kind of information processing is a big part of this, isn't it? Like, how is this organization getting the information? All of the organizations, they have to get information about their environment and somehow act and respond, make decisions in some way, act and respond. And you're saying with the centralized organization, well, it's got limited flows, isn't it? Because you're reducing the number of people. So you're reducing the amount of information that can go in. And a lot of it's coming from the past, and a lot of it's kind of fixed long-term planning, isn't it? And executing on that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I might be bringing in a bit of kind of some of the planning literature, which is what kind of suggests this. As a, you know, as I could also be, we could be imposing what's not been working and saying that this is the solution. I think the hope that is a decentralized organization is the solution for this. I'm not sure if, you know, I guess I don't know the evidence base for that, but certainly centralized ones tend to be, you know, much more appropriate for kind of deliberate planning. It's just that obviously emergence is always, you know, is always something that people need to be able to deal with. And yeah, like you say, that's about, you know, enabling better flows of information.
Yeah, okay, let's get to it later on. We talk about adaptive capacity, but it's a good one, thank you. Agile in responding to a crisis, okay. Agility in responding to a crisis, faster action in decentralized organization, decentralized politicized. Someone want to say a word about this? Policies, sorry, decentralized policies. Decentralized democratization. So alignment, common interest.
Yes. Yes, I think it will align all the activities. So with a common goal or interest, and it brings peer-to-peer transactions. So everybody has to agree on every process step, and that makes it a more skin in the game approach, an organization flow.
Well, let's focus on this one, alignment of common interests. So how do we get alignment in a centralized organization, right? Some people in charge and they make decisions, and then there's a kind of chain of command, and they make sure everyone's in line with the execution of those decisions. And what you're saying here, alignment, common interest, how do you think you get that in a decentralized organization? Difficult question.
I think with intrinsic motivation and with incentives.
Yeah, it's one thing that's changing in our world, isn't it? That people are more interested in showing up to work to things that they value and they want to be part of, isn't it? And that's a problem with the centralized system, that you got someone in the center there deciding what this is all about and what's important and so forth. And that excludes the engagement of many people along many dimensions. And this kind of decentralized organization, if you haven't got someone in the center, many people can kind of contribute their own interpretation and show up. It can be organized around more something that people value in, can't it? And that can be part of the alignment kind of thing, that they're there. Okay, out of those shared kind of intentions. Okay, so intrinsic motivation is enhanced. This is someone else. Someone want to pick up on that thread?
That would be me again, Joss. Yeah, no, I think it was just said before, actually, kind of in the chat. I think by definition, a decentralized organization, you probably need a foundation of intrinsic motivation to be part of a decentralized organization. But I think what one also finds is that intrinsic motivation, further enhances itself. And also, if you will, there's almost a personal scaling up, which then leads to a collective scaling up. So if we're part of a decentralized organization, the person to your left tends to be more engaged which then ramps up your level of engagement, which then kind of has spillover effect, So in many ways, it has a sort of multiply effect that one finds within a decentralized organization. So that's just the elaboration on that point. Thanks.
I think it can do. It's not to say that it always will, but okay. Control and command management, bottom-up communications is difficult. Someone want to talk on that? Closed organizations work well where efficiency is the focus. The environment is stable. Yeah, They're really designed for, well, it's kind of analytical in a sense, in an analytical sort of model where we're kind of drilling down to optimize the kind of internal workings of the organization. That's kind of what it's focused on. And it's got to be a kind of knowable, stable, predictable environment where the problem's kind of well defined, or else it's difficult to kind of optimize things. If the problem is kind of unknown and you're in an unstable environment, you can't really you're kind of exploring stuff, aren't you? And maybe it's better to be having kind of lots of different experiments in that kind of environment. Anybody want to speak on this one? What fast decision making in centralized organizations are we talking about here?
That was me, Josh. Because then the manager or CEO can make the decisions. It's more top down. So it's easier to make a decision for your own than in a decentralized community.
Yeah, but potentially you could, if we had the right structures and right technology, right? Think about how fast nowadays, you know, if some celebrity or something posts a post out there on social media, there's 1,000 likes on it within, you know, 30 seconds, right? So how fast we can do these things, or if people are properly incentivized, you know, we're getting into a world where we can do decentralized decision making as fast, almost as fast as centralized. I'm not disagreeing with you. I traditionally, this is certainly the case, but we're getting into a world where this technology makes it possible for us to actually do decentralized coordination, decision making so efficiently and so fast that it could compete with them.
Yeah, because it's not really making a decision if you like a post. I think it's unconscious activity.
Depends. Yeah, it depends on like how important this decision is. But if it's an important decision, even the centralized person is going to have to think about it, right? So yeah. So what are what new examples? Residential assembly. Okay. Anybody want to talk on that?
It just came to my mind because last month we had a residential assembly. I'm not sure about the English word. When people in a district were invited to decide on a green park, what to do there, how to do this, and it was like an open organization that everyone could join, even if they didn't live there. But mostly it was a residential gathering or meeting about our common park.
And who facilitated it?
One of the residents.
Okay, so
a woman.
Yeah. So one of the residents there was no kind of centralized organization supporting this. No. So they were making a decision about building a park or looking after a park or something?
Looking after a park and what to implement there to give an initiation to the local government. And so there were a lot of people and a lot of ideas, and there will be follow-up. So it was kind of...
So those people are making decisions about what they want, and then they're going to give it to the local government to execute on it, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And how did it go? Do you come to some consensus, or were there lots of disagreements? Or
there were digestible groups, so not everyone, 100 people at once made decisions, but there were a couple of topics. If we would like to have a playground there or something commercial, a buffet or something. And it was organized by the people, how they formed these smaller groups. And every smaller group had its initiation and then told it to this woman who started.
So each group was on a particular topic, and you could choose which topic you went to, or just.
Yeah, it wasn't so organized. So there were a couple of topics people were going around, and if they were interested, they joined. So it was really exciting.
Yeah. I guess it goes back to, I guess if it had been done centrally, it probably would have been, well, it would have been a lot more orderly, right? I guess that's the thing about centralized systems. They're a lot more organized. They can be kind of planned. Your one was maybe a bit, as you say, it was a little bit all over the place. But they managed to come to there was some outcome from it. They managed to kind of come up with some proposal for local authorities.
Yes, she already put together a proposal, and she formed a Facebook group where anyone could join and review this proposal. So
cool.
It might be not the most effective way, but it was interesting. And and a lot of people came together with very good intentions. So it was good.
Is your first experience kind of that, or do you have lots of those things in your neighborhood?
It was my first, and I've never heard about it before.
Cool. Okay, thank you for that. So I think this one's yours also. Is it let ideas, thoughts emerge what you would never think about by a biased, closed organization? Yeah, that's part of the problem, isn't it? Limited people, limited way of looking at the world. Okay.
Actually, down there was that for complexity, open might be better, but I was thinking how we read out these tickets that. So in regarding to Sinafin, when you have a complex problem, you act and measure back what happens, or check back what happens. And open societies or open organizations are not that fast. That's my other ticket, that the close can be hyper fast in reaction time. So I think you have to decide what the problem needs. If it needs to be solved fast, maybe that's for the closed one. And for if you need to have the widest solution or engagement, yes, it may be the open.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think you see that in different forms of organizations, like governments have an executive which has to just execute on certain things fast and effectively. And then they have like a legislator or whatever, where we're supposed to have an input. Those people are represented by us, and it's pretty slow. And so, they get elected and so forth. So I think it's a good example of kind of two different dimensions to it. There's still a place for certainly still a place for centralized kind of linear regulation and so forth. Okay, thank you for that. Let's take a look at this one here. We're talking about decentralization here, actually. That one was about open versus closed. So centralized systems of all kinds are defined by a design pattern that connects many at the edges to the few at the center. And I guess this is why it's kind of expressive of a reductionist approach, because actually it's one of the one of the fundamental and interesting characteristics of this, that it's always going to reduce down, because it's going from diversity at the edges. It's got to bring the information into the center where there are a few people by definition, right? If it's centralized, there are a few people in the center and there are many at the edges. So that means there's always this reduction process of information of whatever it is. So it's a good expression of reductionism, where we take many variables. This organization, you think about like a corporation of 100, 200,000 people around the planet and their interactions across so many different spheres and dimensions. And somehow a board of directors, has to be able to make decisions, 10 people, 20 people about this thing. So there's this massive information kind of compression going on. And that's one aspect to centralized organizations. And yeah, that underlying dynamic really constrains a lot of things and defines a lot of things. So overall coordination is achieved by centralizing key decisions in the hands of a few, while the outer majority are organized through some kind of chain of command, right? These people aren't here quite often because they really believe in this or whatever. It's that there is some kind of chain of command. These people, you know, if you're going to have a plan and you're going to move towards that, and you're going to make decisions through a few centralized people, well, other people are going to have to execute on that, and they're going to have to kind of do what these people say in some sense, or else it doesn't really make sense. While the outer majority are organized through a chain of command to execute on those decisions. So there's that problem. We know in bureaucracy, there's this separation of kind of the intelligent people and the people who just execute. And you end up with a lot of kind of zombie people in the organization who are just executing. And that has problems with respect to kind of adaptive capacity and so forth. And engagement too. That's a big part of this organization, that these people in the center, they're very empowered, they're engaged because they're at the top. The other people at the edges, they to some extent become disempowered because they're executing on the decisions made by others. So distributed organizations are based upon nonlinear network connectivity between the members, and a relatively high level of autonomy and productive capacity resides with each agent in the system as they work towards a common purpose. So autonomy is a big part of this. And if you look at decentralized systems, open ones, like Wikipedia, right? You don't have to go and work for Wikipedia. You don't have to type a Wikipedia article. You don't have to put a video on YouTube. You don't have to list your video, your room on Airbnb. You choose to do that because it's something you want to do, either through incentives or because of value in some form, right? That might be kind of, you know, basic value in terms of money, or it might be some kind of more altruistic one in terms of Wikipedia and maintaining this knowledge base for the world. But everyone's choosing, right? Once you're part, and they're always choosing, right? You can stop at any time posting your Wikipedia article. Here, if you become part of this organization, then you're part of it, and you kind of have to do what it says for the period that you're part of it. So I think autonomy is a really key part of this, that people are choosing to be part of the organization, and they're choosing, and also productive capacity resides at the edges. These people, you know, Wikipedia wouldn't be possible. It wasn't possible until we had computers, until we were able to contribute something. In the past, we weren't able to. So there's got to be productive capacity at the edges, or else it's not going to work. They won't be able to contribute anything. So yeah, I mean, this is another dimension to it. We talk about kind of vertical versus horizontal. The organization is defined by a fixed layer of authority with responsibilities, authority, and specific tasks delegated out to those at lower ranks. As the organization grows, more layers of management are added to deal with the concomitant growth in formal procedures and bureaucracy that ensures accountability. And that's a problem with scaling, isn't it? Because as this thing goes, it's going to have more and more of these layers, and that's going to create more and more overhead. So it actually gets kind of more costly and more overbearing. And we know that most of the bureaucracies in this world, they never get more than 100 or 200,000 people. We don't have things that look like Facebook, or bureaucracies that look like Facebook in terms of 2.5 billion people. Most of them actually relatively small compared to what we could do in decentralized networks. Because of this, right? This overhead kind of cost gets overbearing and complicated. Horizontal organizations take a flat horizontal structure. Teams exist as semi-autonomous circles wherein they can self-organize to achieve tasks. Structure is based on abstraction, more specific domains nested within broader, more general functions. So it's the idea of a circle organization like holacracy or sociocracy. And it's just smaller circles, specific functions nested in broader functions, nested in the overall organization. So it's actually kind of flat, and it's the idea of abstraction, more specific things nested inside of broader ones. Whereas this one's, and that's kind of the organizational structure, where this one's more about that kind of chain of command, because these people have to execute on the stuff these people are deciding upon. So let's take a couple of questions here. what are the advantages to centralized organizations? What are the disadvantages to centralized organizations? And the same for decentralized organizations. I guess we covered some of them already, but please jump in and post up some more thinking. You could have ideas about this kind of flat versus vertical, or this question of autonomy. I'll share the link with you again. Okay, just looking at the chat here, I've got some comments. Tom Underwood, I think perhaps the size of the problem has an effect on the speed of reaction. Large bureaucracies might be good at dealing quickly to big problems, but less good at small ones. Vijaya, to achieve efficiency, the organization needs to focus inwards towards processes. This is a characteristic of closed organizations. This is very interesting, Gabby. I think we have to question the mindset that in decentralized organizations, everything has to be co-created and decided through dialogue. Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's not always needed, and it can be quite inefficient if you try to do that. So here we have it. Horizontal decision making may be difficult depending on the size of the organization. Mixed approach, vertical and horizontal, power relations and decision making. Someone want to talk on that?
Yes, I wrote that. And obviously I was speaking about both of them. I was thinking in the context of small, not larger organizations. There are obviously new models, different models that emerge where you both have vertical and horizontal. Vertical when it comes to accountability and all that, but the horizontal is when it comes to the leadership structure, if I can put it like that. And
yeah,
what emerged from my experience is decision making becomes difficult because at some point they might think that the horizontal model is allowing contribution or participation, but also making sure that everybody in the leadership has a say. But when it comes to now accountability, when they mix the vertical part of the vertical model, it becomes difficult because then the people that are not in the leadership or that are not in the executive management, it gets difficult when it comes to lines of accountability. So anyone from the leadership has the possibility to talk to, to whichever person. So something that I've learned also,
Yeah, it's a good point about accountability, isn't it? That's part of why we have this, isn't it? So that we can actually, people have roles and they're held accountable for things. So there is, good reasons why we have this. It's, I mean, it's still, how do we get that in a decentralized organization? It might not be so easy. But to get to your original point about there can be centralized and decentralized, and I think that's what kind of the platform model is. Like if you think about even Wikipedia, right? We know Wikipedia is an organization and there's a bunch of people who work for Wikipedia, as well as the millions of people or thousands of people who contribute to it. So those platforms like Airbnb, we know there's a closed organ, there's a CEO there and there's a head of this and head of that, but there's also many of us transacting on top of it. So maybe it's kind of a hybrid model that's needed. We know that there are some advantages to centralized organizations, and we know those are some of the most successful, those platforms are some of the most successful things in our world. And they kind of, maybe trying to get a synergy between the two is the difficult thing, might be part of it too.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. The hybrid model is what I noticed that happen in some places, in some examples that I've seen. It just emerged from that reason, the particular reason that you are giving, to try to meet the balance.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get back to here. What's this big purple one? I don't have answers, but I do have questions. I'd like to better understand in decentralized organizations, who is creating the network, circles, horizontal structure? How are folks talking responsibly rather than being delegated to? Yeah. So maybe I think it gets back to the point we just made there. I think sometimes people and organizations find it difficult to suddenly self-organize and create their own structures for organizing it. And that's part of what the platform kind of model is about. I think it creates the structure, the context. I think that's actually needed, like someone, you gave the example of someone kind of stepping up in your community and creating the space where you guys could get together. I think it takes someone to take on responsibility or an organization to create that structure wherein others can kind of interact and self-organize. So I think there's a kind of role for centralization in that respect, at least sometimes. Open, less bureaucratic, open freedom to act on behalf of the organization benefits, open freedom to act. Anybody want to explain this one?
Let me explain. No, there are some examples on the community of open and free software, where people have an idea to create a new software, and if they follow the rules of open software community, everything is okay. No, open software community have their own ethics, rule of good practice, and so on. And the other example is the Israel army. The different task groups in the Israel army have their own. They have a very clear purpose, no, to work on behalf of their nation, no, and sometimes they take different groups take decisions on their own without just communicating the decision to the head of the headmaster, no, of the group, no. That is the reason why they just, how to say, they make combat very quickly, and they're success very quickly.
And it's needed when you're in a battle, no? And things are changing.
Yes.
And
Yes, they take a decision very quickly. That is something that characterizes them, no?
Yeah, and to get back to your example of open source software, it's an interesting one because we know a lot of things have come out, like Wikipedia is almost kind of, Linux and WordPress and all of this. A lot of things have come out by communities coming together and building stuff. But I'd also say at this stage, when they come together, there's a lot of resources for them at this stage in there. Like you say, there's a whole kind of culture and ethics. There's also a lot of software for them to collaborate, and there's probably,
sometimes they have funds and grants for a specific project. When the project is becoming very, very large, they can have funds and also grants for just producing that software, for developing software, no? And those, and they start to organize in small groups with same ethics, with same rules of good practice, and with the spirit to share and exchange knowledge. And those small groups can share information and also knowledge with other groups. When maybe one group needs some specific function, and they found, oh, there are other groups that is working on that function. We need to make a connection with our software and that software. And one of the advantage is they don't need, that group don't need to take care of what they are doing the others. They only need to take care of the connection. The connection must be, how to say, smooth. Between one group and the other group.
But and I'd say it's working because they share, as you say, a common ethic, a common value, and common motive. But also, I'm sure they have very good communications tools like Slack or something like this, don't they? Where they have, like, without those tools, they're probably spread around the world, aren't they? Like, but without those tools, they'd probably struggle, right? Wouldn't they? So I think that's part of it. Having good communications platforms that enable that.
And they also share experience on software management, group management, and also they share those experience in different congress meetings and so on.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Gabriel, for that. I think it's a good contribution because that's a very it's one community that's been quite successful or very successful in terms of how they kind of self-organize themselves to a certain degree, and peer production is what they call it, be able to produce things as peers instead of having a formal organization. Okay, so a few examples of good practice. What do we, or defies ego? Anybody want to talk on this? Defies ego?
And that was me. I don't know if it's written correctly, but I think like one of the things that for me like I am trying to turn an educational organization. We are trying to do that into something more decentralized, and I think one of the main insights that we have had is that it has to be a personal transformation first, more than an organizational transformation. Because if you're expecting everyone else to let go of their control and their ways of being autocratic, you really have to work with your ego and with your emotions, with your belief that you have the answers and you have the truth, and they should just they should just do what I say because I have the answer, and I don't know why everyone else is not finding this answer that is the truth. So I think that we've realized how much it has to do with moving from your own ego into really seeing the potential and the wisdom and the knowledge and the skills in others, and how that collective mind can bring amazing things if you really let go of that ego. I hope I made myself understood.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And people have to be ready for it in a certain sense, I think, is as individuals, like we talk about decentralization, we're quick to talk about organizational structure and which is the best structure and so forth. But I think the important point you're adding is not everything's kind of rational, right? There are human beings here and they have egos, as you say, and they get emotionally detached and so on and so forth. And you've got to do, that's just as important if you're going to actually change this and be successful in that, having them ready for something. I think them seeing the value in, I think touched upon at the end there, in different perspectives and the value of decentralizing, what that can bring. But also, as you say, kind of, they're going to have to kind of deal with their ego in some way. I mean, that's to a large extent why we get those organizations, isn't it, that look like that vertical thing, because you have, you know, the people with the big egos at the center there, and they kind of want to tell everyone else what to do. So how do we, the big aspect of psychology, I think, as you note, it's not just structure. Okay. In both cases, there are factors to consider. Might be an advantage and disadvantage for either type. Reaction time, okay. Level of engagement, yep. Knowledge problem or knowledge procedure or unknown. Known problem or known procedure or unknown. Okay. Location of participants. Who owns the resources? Pays the costs? Everyone want to talk about this level of engagement thing? You want to talk on this one? Okay, limited vision. Which one's this, the centralized one? Has limited vision, maybe because it has limited people to process the information. Change is slow. Yeah, we have a kind of, we get planning kind of approach to things. It's less about the disadvantages of either, but how to combine elements of both in effective ways. Anybody want to share ideas on that? It's kind of what we talked about already. Trying to get a kind of a hybrid where we get a certain synergy between the centralized and decentralized, but so often they're kind of presented in black and white, aren't they? And like it's a battle like this against that, and which one's better, and are we going to go decentralized or centralized, when the complexity probably lies a lot in something in between and getting the two to kind of work together in some way.
I think the so the other point I was thinking about on this was actually, sometimes I think we might be conflating some things of what we think are kind of features of centralized or decentralized organizations. So for example, kind of tech companies, that are very decentralized, have got very good communication tools to allow them to do that. I don't necessarily think that those communication tools are a feature necessarily of decentralized organizations, but they've kind of come in at the same time. So actually, what parts of these are we perhaps thinking are features of these two types of organizations, and actually what parts are actually just ways of working with organizations that we could for example, with communication systems, actually, you might just have much better centralized organizations with better communication systems that suit those. I'm not giving an answer to either, but and I think people have alluded to that a bit already.
Yeah, and I think we're quick to kind of throw stones at the other side, aren't we, and kind of say what we do is best. It's all good. Decentralization, it's great, and it's going to solve and all the problems are because of those guys over there. And initially we do okay, but eventually we run up against the same barriers as those guys had, and we end up in the same. So how can we get something? I think the thing in this discussion, how can we get something realistic, right, instead of kind of idealistic about either. And kind of attached to either and throwing stones at the other, and actually understand like the real underlying dynamics and what one works best where and how they can work together. Cool. Let's wrap up. Our time is up at this stage, so we'll wrap up. Interesting conversation, and definitely more dimensions to it. We can continue in the future at some stage. There's two more boards here we wanted to talk about, kind of this peer-to-peer interaction as a key part of the decentralized organization, and the way it feedback loops that's creating organization and patterns, and then also this factor around kind of swarm agility of these decentralized organizations versus this kind of scaling efficiency of the centralized one. But we'll leave that for a future date. Thank you very much for joining, and I'll let you guys get on with your days, and we'll talk again maybe in about a month. We'll do another session. Okay, guys, take care now. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.